This day is given to us beyond anything we could create or earn. Whether deserved or undeserved, we receive this day as a gift from the universe, a gift from God, a gift from life itself. So come and let us worship with gratitude for this and so many gifts, with humility for our shortcomings, resilience to face the challenges ahead, and let us worship with hope that we will continue to transform our lives and to transform our world. I invite us to join together in our opening hymn, Love Will Guide Us. Please rise.
So welcome to the Unitarian Church of Baton Rouge, where, Lee, I think I'm a little hot, but that might be the weather. My name is Nathan. I'm one of your ministers. I am pleased to welcome you today. We have a bunch going on, so let me just let you know. We know it is Father's Day. We know that it is Juneteenth. The first, by the way, federally recognized Juneteenth history. And so if we're going to do the clapping thing, we're going to do it a lot, but it's Reverend Eric Koza's last Sunday with us. Oh, no, that's interesting. I thought they would be claps. For those of you online and don't have a mic'd sanctuary, it was a collective awe rather than a collective clap. We'll spend some time exploring that later. But some of the things you should know is during the middle hour, we have programming for children and youth, and we have programming for adults. We are having Leslie Grover, a member of this church, lead an art, this is an emphasis on art, of spiritual exploration class. It is non-cumulative. It's designed to be a drop-in, so you can come any week. Those of you online, you can come right down after this. And then this upcoming weekend, we have promised Together Baton Rouge 50 Unitarian Universalists to be at their Enough is Enough rally at Galvez Plaza at 9 a.m. I know it's going to be absurdly hot, which is why we've provided you the comfort of this air conditioning today so that you can be ready for next Saturday. And if you do that, we will provide you also free admission to the Pride Fest. Whoever said it doesn't cost anything is not entirely telling the truth. He is telling the truth. But for the sake of your motivation, he's not. So we need 50 of you there. So if you can sign up to be there or just show up, that would be great. And we also have people working the table at Pride Fest. So Saturday the 25th is a big day. And then, because we're expecting the Supreme Court to release some news this week on Roe versus Wade, we have brought in a minister. We anticipated this months ago. Reverend Darcy Roque is a Unitarian Universalist minister in New Orleans. She does reproductive justice work. She's been very active. And about 5 years ago, they had an article somewhere on the internet that listed the 10 clergy to watch in the country, and she was in the top 10. So, so come and watch her. Oh, that's a lot. All right. Glad you're with us.
As Nathan alluded to, there is a lot of milestones to mark on this day. And I'll start by noting one personally relevant that you'd have no way of knowing otherwise. As it happens, today is the 17th anniversary of my ordination to ministry. And on that day, during that ordination service, there were two different people who spoke during the service who remarked on the many occasions that were coming together on June 19th. One of those people was the person who preached the sermon for the ordination service. It's a name that'll be familiar to a few of you, Steve Crump. And two quick notes. For those who don't recognize that name, Steve Crump served this church for 36 years, from 1983 to January of 2019. And for those of you who do recognize the name and are wondering, why on earth am I going into that detail? It's so obvious. It's not obvious anymore. It's been 3.5 years since he served here, and more people are coming who came to this congregation after that time, which is relevant for us to remember. But I appreciated Steve lifting up that it was Father's Day, and also that it was the eve of the summer solstice that day. And he spoke on the beginning of summer and the refulgence of summer. Some of you have heard Steve Crump use that term, refulgence. It had fallen out of my vocabulary until he reminded me of it. The other person who was the person who gave the charge to the minister, a common aspect of ordination and installation services. That was actually one of my seminary professors, the Reverend Dr. Stephen Sprinkle. And Dr. Sprinkle, a Disciples of Christ minister and proud out gay man, noted that it was Gay Pride Month, and also noted that it was Juneteenth. And I'll always remember what he said about the day. The day that almost 200,000 Texas slaves learned that they were free. And then he went on to address me and say, your religious tradition has a long history of proclaiming freedom. I charge you to do the same. Yes, they were such affirming words to hear from a non-Unitarian Universalist. But I keep thinking about how he described Juneteenth, because that's pretty much how I heard it growing up as a white kid in Texas after the Civil Rights era, that no enslaved Texans knew they were free until June 19th, 1865, when Major General Gordon Granger read the Emancipation Proclamation for the first time on Texas soil. That supposedly was after he stepped off the boat at Galveston Harbor. I call that version of the story the Revised Standard Version. But here's the deal. It didn't actually quite happen that way. Major General Granger was already there. His troops arrived the day before, and what happened on the 19th was he issued General Order Number 3, which officially enforced the Emancipation Proclamation in the state of Texas. And I missed the problems, and frankly, the embedded white supremacy attitudes that underlied that Revised Standard Version of the Juneteenth story. Because it assumed that enslaved African Americans were clueless about the stakes for them in the Civil War. And sure, there were certainly slave owners who may have kept some of the people they held in bondage uninformed about the Emancipation Proclamation specifically. But most black folk knew what the war meant. It was a war for liberation, among many other things. So no, Juneteenth is not a celebration of spreading the news of freedom after 2.5 years. It's a celebration of enforcing freedom. It celebrates the general finally having the troops, the means, to actualize the freedom that all too many white Texans were not willing to recognize regardless of the law until federal forces were able to make them grant that freedom. And I'm reminded of words spoken, actually written almost 100 years later in a jail cell in Birmingham, Alabama, when Martin Luther King Jr. reminded us that freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor, it must be demanded by the oppressed. Now that the celebration of Juneteenth is federalized, now that it's enforced by our national government, this is a good day to remember that our charge, not just mine as a minister, but all of our charges as Unitarian Universalists goes far beyond proclaiming freedom. We are all charged this Juneteenth to promote the enforcement of freedom, opposing so many of the attempted rollbacks of equal protection under the law, and affirming the equal rights as well as the inherent worth of all people. And that is what will make this Juneteenth celebration of freedom real.
Yeah, so that'll preach. Also, on the week that the legislature was given one task, give more black people the right to representation, and they failed. So I have to transition from that preaching to sharing with you a lot of sad news, mostly about mothers of church members. So first let me say, we have heard from a church member, Noah Renee, and they are recovering from hospitalization, so we are going to have a card and thinking about them. Also, the mother of Penny Nichols, Elaine Wilson Nichols, died on Monday, so we're placing a stone for her. Agnes Girard, the mother of Annette Girard and Vicky Crandall, died on Tuesday. And also, probably about a 10-year member of this church, Sarah Traylor, died after a short time in hospice on Tuesday. She had all of her family with her, and they got to say goodbye. She had moved from hospitalization, moved to assisted living, and I think just didn't bounce back. Her service will be July 16th at 10 a.m. And a church member who died a few months ago, M.K. Pulitz, we're going to have her service on August 20th. So it was a weird, hard 24 hours to be church staff when we got those 3 calls. Anyway, we're thinking of them and their family. And this ritual is open to everyone here, visitor and member alike. We invite you to come forward either along the west or the east wall. Take a stone, let it represent whatever is on your heart today. Place it in the chalice bowl. We now invite those who wish to come forward as we place stones. We say together, with hope to make this a better world, where its flame, its light is the symbol of the power of love.
From all eternity, all the skies
I was reminded at this upcoming time of transition of words from a particular translation of Christian scriptures. There was a version of the Bible that came out some years ago called The Message. It was written in a very contemporary for its time language by Bible scholar Eugene Peterson. And it is willing to forego direct definitional accuracy and instead focus on trying to accurately convey the emotions in a more contemporary vernacular. So this is the passage from the beginning of Matthew chapter 3, which we traditionally know as the passage that talks about John the Baptist. While Jesus was living in the Galilean hills, John, called the Baptizer, was preaching in the desert country of Judea. His message was simple and austere. Like his desert surroundings, change your life. God's kingdom is here. John and his message were authorized by Isaiah's prophecy, thunder in the desert, prepare for God's arrival, make the road smooth and straight. I can't think of a time I've ever seen a verse of scripture look more like a commercial for a monster truck rally. And as dramatic as it sounds, I'm also reminded of a passage a few verses later. This is verse 11 and 12. I'm baptizing you here in the river, turning your old life in for a kingdom life. The real action comes next. The main character in this drama, compared to him, I'm a mere stagehand, will ignite the kingdom life within you, a fire within you, the Holy Spirit within you, changing you from the inside out. He's going to clean house. We interim ministers tend to identify in many ways with John the Baptist, whether it's our religious tradition or not, that understanding that there's someone who comes to prepare the way for someone else to come after them speaks to us. It resonates with our understanding of our work and what it's about. And it's a positive reminder for me, and has been throughout the interim ministry phase of my career, a phase which appears to be ending, frankly, today. Because the church I'm going to serve in Denton, Texas, besides the fact that it's my own home church, that is likely to become a longer-term ministry. It's not an interim position. So I've been reflecting about this shift, but also about how leaving can feel. And that there are some parallels in this story, because there are going to be some consequences of this leaving, uncomfortable though they feel, and they do for me, and several of you have said they do for you as well, for many reasons. But some of the consequences are going to be good for both of us. I'm returning to a familiar location where I lived for 11 years. I'm 14 years, actually. I'm shifting into a different phase of my ministry career. And you are shifting into a new phase, what has felt to many of you like an extended interim period. I know some of that is being exacerbated by the pandemic, and some of it is simply the fact that you've sort of had two interim phases back to back. One to prepare for your new senior minister, Reverend Nathan Ryan, and then to prepare for your next minister of congregational life, Reverend Chris Long, who starts next month. So good things are coming for each of us. But despite the benefits, there's reluctance. I'm certainly reluctant to leave. As several of you have heard me say, among other things, I have wished that for 20 years since I served my internship here, that I could take this church building and facility with me to every congregation I've served. I know you won't let me have it, and I don't blame you, but also that's going to be a little hard to pack. But anyway, It has been good in so many ways, and that does leave a reluctance. But I'll say more in a few moments about how it can be helpful to think about a minister leaving a congregation as we first hear some words about transition from a rather different source.
So this reading comes from the boot. This reading comes from the Buddhist scriptures, the Mahaparinibbana Sutra. It describes the response to the Buddhist, by Buddhist monks, the ones called the bhikkhus, to the death of the Buddha. Then when the Blessed One had passed, some bhikkhus, not yet freed from passion, lifted up their arms and wept. And some, flinging themselves on the ground, rolled from side to side and wept, lamenting, "Too soon has the Blessed One gone to nirvana. Too soon has the eye of the world vanished from sight." But the bhikkhus who were freed from passion, mindful and clearly comprehending, reflected in this way: impermanent are all compounded things. How could this be otherwise? And the Venerable Anuruddha addressed the bhikkhus, saying, "Enough, friends, do not lament. For has not the Blessed One declared that with all that is dear and beloved there must be change, separation, and severance? Of that which is born come into being, compounded and subject to decay, how can one say, may it not come to dissolution?"
There was an essay delivered to a gathering of ministers, UU ministers and others, coincidentally 20 years ago this month as my internship was concluding. It was delivered by the Reverend Dr. Mark Morrison Reed, respected minister and church historian among Unitarian Universalists. And he described what it can mean for a ministerial tenure when one thinks about the impermanence that Nathan just spoke of. And he lifts up the painful fine print, as he calls it, of what it means to serve in a congregation, and 3 points he makes. These are his words. You will love your parishioners with all your heart, but never befriend them. You will pour out your lifeblood for the community, but never settle there. And, perhaps the most dramatic of all, you shall die to the congregation so that the ministry might live. Now, these words have been somewhat controversial ever since they were first spoken. And they do put in very stark terms what it means for a minister to be leaving. And while I might pick at aspects that are exaggerated, I take his general point as an important one. There is an extent to which we have to understand that leaving a congregation means a pretty dramatic change to our relationship with that congregation, which means stepping back in a way to give space for the new ministers to truly become your ministers. And he gives a personal example of this that he experienced in Rochester, New York. Now, when Reverend Dr. Morrison Reed delivered this, he was serving our congregation in Toronto, Ontario, alongside his spouse and co-minister, Reverend Donna Morrison Reed. But he noted that 2.5 years after we left the previous congregation they had served, which was First Universalist Church of Rochester, New York, a church member we had known well died. Beth Banks, who followed us at First Universalist, Reverend Beth Banks, invited me to deliver the eulogy. We both thought Donna and I had been away long enough. We were wrong. I knew it as soon as I began interacting with the older ministers, with the older members. I was the minister and Beth the interloper. And that is what we work to avoid. And that's why we tend to step back. It has a lot to do, I suspect, I've not asked him directly, but having known Steve Crump for 20 years and knowing his respective boundaries, I wouldn't be surprised if this played into the fact that he's only been here a couple of times in the last few months and stayed away for, I believe, 3 years before that. And it's why so many of us interims, myself included, try to step back as fully as we can. It's not because we don't love you. It's because we know you need space to connect with the new ministers. But it's a deep commitment to a ministry of preparing the way for the one to come after. And I don't want to put too much pressure on my colleague, Reverend Chris Long. It's an exaggeration, sure, to say something like he's going to clean house, as was said in Matthew chapter 3, but that stepping back is an intentional point. And it's a reminder also that ministry takes particular forms in congregations. Some of those forms last longer than others. Sometimes they only last 2 years. Sometimes they last 36. But there is something about seeing a particular ministry in a particular congregation as a particular wave on the ocean tides. Someone named Elder Olson once said, "Nothing is lost. The universe is honest. Time, like the sea, gives all back in the end. You were never the water, only a wave. Not substance, but a form substance assumed." Mark Morrison Reed referred to that quote and noted that he could see her life, referring to Reverend Beth Banks, and my own, rising as does a wave, cresting and then subsiding once again into the sea. Now I've come to see ministry in this way. I see us rolling along, one following the next. We are not the ministry of a church, he concludes, but a form ministry assumes. And there are new forms of ministry coming for you. We will say more about those in a few moments, but I invite you first to remain seated as we join together in song, How Could Anyone Ever Tell You? Let's sing.
How could anyone ever tell you
let us join together in that deeper sharing of prayer. I invite you to reach deep within, reach far beyond yourself, and connect with what you know to be sacred. Let us pray. Spirit of life and of love, God known by so many names and mystery beyond all our naming, on this day, the weekend which we mark the end of spring and mark so many occasions, we know that we are marking endings. Some of the endings, the deaths of loved ones, even fellow church members, especially hard-hitting for many of us. Other endings, such as endings of ministries, bittersweet, allowing both a time for grief and an opening for something new to arise. We're reminded by the poet T.S. Eliot that the end is where we begin. The ending is the starting point. So help us to recognize how we start again in these times of ending, how we can move forward to new opportunities, how we can move forward into new phases of our lives as individuals and collectively as a congregation. And may we be blessed by the new that is on the horizon for us all. So may it be for us all. Amen. Amazing Grace. I invite you to rise as you are able. Let us sing together.
This is also from Mark Morrison, Reverend Mark Morrison Reed's piece. I suggest the image of the phoenix serve us as a model for leave-taking. Legend has it that when it saw death draw near, it would make a nest of sweet-smelling wood and resins, which it would expose to the full force of the sun's rays until it burnt itself to ashes in the flame. Another phoenix would then rise up from the marrow of its bones. Upon seeing death draw near, intentionality and mindfulness can inform us as we put all in order. There is celebration and thanksgiving in our leave-taking as we surrender ourselves with sweet-smelling woods and resins. In the full sunlight of truth, we explore what our years together meant. A purifying flame consumes the old grudges and us. How appropriate for a faith whose central symbol is the flaming chalice. Then, finally and appropriately, the next ministry can rise out of the marrow of our bones, for it arises from the distillation of our essence, our deeds and dreams and love for those with whom we have striven to build the beloved community.
As someone who leaves congregations frequently and enters congregations frequently, I'm reminded that there, even across the many differences, are some similarities. And many years ago, I heard them expressed well in the writings of a Protestant minister, I believe Presbyterian, the Reverend Lawrence Ferris. He talked about the 10 commandments of leaving a congregation. Now, we won't go into all 10 of them, it would take too long, but a handful are relevant for us today, I think. One is that thou shalt affirm thy congregation's ministry. And what that means for me now is a little different than what it's meant for me before. Because unlike other congregations I've served as interim, I've known you for many years, as I've said before. And even in the first year that I was with you, when every Sunday I would come to an essentially empty sanctuary, and we would be offering the service to that camera specifically, is what it felt like at moments, of course knowing that we were connecting with many people on the other side of that camera. It's still, even in that time, and especially now that I'm getting to see people's faces directly, well, half of your faces, it has been an incredible affirmation for me of what it is to be back in familiar territory. And I know that there are new forms of ministry that are coming for you. One has already been emerging for almost a year and a half since Reverend Nathan Ryan stepped into the senior minister role. And another is starting next month when Reverend Chris Long joins you. I'm going to be cheerleading for this congregation from 500 miles away as hard as I can. And knowing that you are in as good a shape, whether it feels like it or not, you are in as good a shape as most any congregation I know of coming out of this pandemic era. There are challenges. Every congregation has challenges right now, and certainly you have some. But I'm more struck by the resources, the resilience, and the commitment and vitality that I continue to see in this congregation, that even though it's not the same, does remind me of what I saw 20 years ago when I interned here. So, another point, another commandment, if you will, thou shalt attend to thy family. And that's a little complex for me today because I had hoped that my spouse Susie would be joining me. We expected to be hitting the road, frankly, directly after the second service is concluded. I came to church this morning with the car packed, because we moved out of our apartment 3 days ago. and our new home in Denton, Texas is already waiting for us. But Susie was under the weather this morning, so I'm sorry that she could not be here to meet many of you directly, and hope for multiple reasons she feels better, mainly because I hope she feels better, but also I'm really hoping for my driving partner today. And that means allowing us time to establish our new life and our new rhythms of life and the new city that we're moving to before my ministry formally starts there on August 1st. And it also means another commandment. Thou shalt, in parentheses, usually, stay away once thou hast left. Which speaks to what I was saying earlier about allowing the space for the new ministry to arise. And that is likely to be the case for me. And there might be an occasional exception. I know of a certain other person who interned at this congregation a lot more recently, Leslie Runnels, and I'm hopeful that there will be an ordination sooner rather than later, and hope to be part of it. And wherever it may be, I imagine I'll be seeing some of you there, and perhaps at other places as well. And I look forward to that time. But I'm also reminded of the final of the 10 Commandments. Thou shalt grieve. This is a loss. And it's a loss for me, and it's a loss, however positive, negative, or mixed it may feel for each of you. And honoring those emotions, however complex they may be, is important, because that too allows us to process how we're feeling in a way that leaves us better prepared for what's to come. There's so much that I'm going to miss from here. And it's not just the Lebanese food, though yes, it's also the Lebanese food. It's the faces, it's the energy, it's the vitality, it's the community. Okay, maybe not the insects, but you know, there is so much that is so good about this congregation and this location. And missing those is going to be something I'll be living with for a while, and it's opening me up for what's to come next. Because there is a good part to the leaving. I've said off and on for 2 years that every transition begins with an ending, and then there's a liminal space before something new starts. In this case, we're only looking at 4 weeks, formally speaking, between today and Reverend Chris Long's first day serving you. But the good thing is that we are opening an opportunity for a new ministry to arise like a phoenix from what remains of the old. And that new ministry, I look forward to serving you well. I will indeed be cheering you on from afar and wishing you all as well as may be in the times to come. It's been a blessing to serve with you. And may it be a blessing for you all in times to come. Amen.
So we're actually now going to collect and share the offering. So some good news for you all. When we meet in person in the sanctuary, when we share the offering, we have given $1,000 a month to organizations that have been doing good works in the world. That's phenomenal, especially when you consider the math that people are watching online, and you've been watching online the whole time, and all of you who are watching online were watching. But anyway, something about being together results in more community organizations doing better. So I ask you to very generously. Well, no, let's do it this way. This is your last Sunday. So I expect we're going to share with Diversity House, which is the organization we're sharing with this month, to get at least $60,000.
At least.
At least. And the math is we're splitting it, so that's, 120? So, you know. Shoot high, right? All right. The morning's offering will now be very gratefully given and received. So just to let y'all know what's coming up next, I have a sort of appreciation for Eric, and then we're going to have the president of the board come up and we'll do a ritualized leave-taking before closing him. But a little insider baseball. So today we're at a weird spot where all of the sound booth volunteers were all out of town together, not at the same. They all went separately together. So what we did is we did the most massive switcheroo we've ever done. So our music director is up in the sound booth, and our family ministry director is at the piano. And this is a deep cut for those of you who are Unitarian Universalist collectors. I'm calling you out for this. In a lot of churches where the kids leave in the middle of the service, they sing this one hymn, Go Now in Peace, which you stuck in on the offering for Eric's last day. So you had to know, but I just wanted to name it. So the first time I met Eric, I did the math, I think you were 25. I was 17. I was a youth representative I was not a youth representative to the board, but I was sitting in on a board meeting. We were trying to get something passed for the youth that we really, really wanted. And we had kind of done a power assessment of who on the board we thought would be good allies and who wouldn't. I still remember who was what and which ministers had terrible hair at the time. Eric was not a minister. He was just a lay leader at the Denton Fellowship. But the other youth who was a liaison pointed to him and said, he is one of the allies. He's kind and he's going to treat us real well. And that's always been my first memory of him. It was in the Fort Worth church where it was a room off to the side, right between the sanctuary and the entrance. But that's always embedded in my brain, Eric. And he's also been the intern here. So his ministry was formed here, and his interim ministry is ending here. I mean, if he's going to go serve as a traditional minister instead of an interim. So this is a bookended church, and this is a bookended moment. And it got me thinking about what we are actually experiencing right now. So the minister's job is a mirror holder. So our job is to be whatever we need to be to help you see the world with all of the complexity and contours, which means we're often out of the way. We don't usually pay attention. I don't know that this is you. I'm projecting onto you. Don't usually pay attention to the significance of what is going on for us because we're so focused on holding the mirror appropriately. So I'm imagining this is a very significant transition that this congregation is central in for Eric. I want also, because I'm the pastor of this congregation, to really think about what your relationship with him is, which is, no matter whether you like it or not, you are trauma bonded with him. And a little bit with me and with our former intern minister, Leslie Runnels. And what I mean by that is the first Sunday you came, or the first week you came, was during that terrible 2020 summer, which was not just pandemic terrible, but that was 5 hurricane terrible. And then you have been with us through all of the bumpy reopening and through the Were you here for the insurrection? Yeah. See, my brain is totally screwed up with this. The insurrection and Hurricane Ida, all of this happened with Eric as our interim minister. So some of you are probably going to react either by overly connecting with him, and the leave taking is going to be more painful than it needs to, or overly distancing, and you need him to leave sooner so you can stop the trauma. And I know we know he's not the source of the trauma, but it just needs to be named, right? That we have all been through some absurd stuff these last 2 years. And Eric has been one of the ministers who's helped get us through it. So I just want to name it. His job in holding the mirror is significantly different than most other of his colleagues, because his job is to get the congregation seeing itself, not just the parishioners. And this church is ready. It's ready. I mean, technically, we had a 2-year transition from the day Steve retired to the day I started as senior. Technically, also, Steve announced in 18, and it's now 2022, and we won't have our new final ministry staff until July. So that's, what, 5 years? So it's either exactly 2 years. I don't do math real well, so it's 4, but like somehow it's 5 also. We're in our 5th year. The point is, it is longer than it seems and not as long as it seems, all at the same time. So as you leave and go through the summer, you know there's a lot of good stuff still coming. The church that has been here for you will still be here for you. And really, genuinely, that same good ally is going to be this church's ally from afar. So as I invite our board president up, this is probably going to be the best time. If you want to express appreciation to Eric, this is the time to do it. Thank you.
Thank you all. And I've had my opportunity to say how wonderful it is. I look forward to saying an individual farewell to many of you in a few moments after the service concludes. But with that.
An interim period is a time of transition, a time between what was and what is not yet. As our interim minister, Eric came to UCBR to help us prepare for our next chapter of ministry. When he arrived, he committed to being truthful and open, to listening deeply to our truths, and to learning from our insights. He promised also that when our work was complete, he would leave clearly and completely that our next chapter of ministry could begin.
Friends, we have done well together. And whether or not our hearts are ready, our work together is complete.
Eric, you have offered us moral leadership, religious insight, and spiritual guidance. You have helped us celebrate our strengths and deal with challenge and pain. We have done our best to remain in honest and open communication with you. We have tried to handle disagreements directly and with kindness so that our shared wisdom could blossom into renewed vitality and vision for this congregation. We have done well together, and whether or not our hearts are ready, our work together is complete.
Now, members and friends of the Unitarian Church of Baton Rouge, I release you from our covenanted relationship as interim minister and congregation. May the work of this interim period continue to empower your congregational life. May the strengths you claimed continue to shape your relationships with one another and give you energy and courage to live your values in the wider world. And with that, I will invite you all to say together these words.
Reverend Eric, we release you from our covenant relationship as interim minister and congregation. We send you forward with appreciation and care. May you continue to bring both challenge and passion to congregation.
offer two last steps. They are symbolic at this first service. They will be for real at the second service. First of all, to my good colleague, Reverend Nathan Ryan, I turn over the keys to the church. I'm going to need these in the middle hour. But again, we will do that for real at the second service so that they will be ready for Reverend Chris Long when he arrives in 4 weeks. And one final step for me to close off a symbol that has been with us throughout this interim ministry period and that always reminds me of John the Baptist. Step out with this reminder that our time of walking together has come to its conclusion, and with gratitude for all that this time has brought. And with that, I invite us to join together one more time in song. Our closing hymn is The Fire of Commitment. I invite you to rise and let's sing together. As we go forth from this sacred time, from the many sacred places where we have gathered to the many sacred places to which we are going, may we know ourselves to be graced with blessings of freedom and of wholeness. For though this ministry together now ends, our service does begin anew. Let's go forth then and continue to serve this community and this hurting world in the spirit of love. Thank you for these 2 years. Go in peace.